Sources at the Barbados Archives Department. This will be addressed by Ms. Karen Proverbs, an archivist. You will be hearing about the records in the archives in the two previous sections, and she will give you more details about them so that when you actually come to the archives or contact the archives to do research, you will know what to do with the records. Karen?
I'm here to present genealogy and its sources. The word archives has dual meanings. On one hand, archives refers to a physical building in which public or private records of historical significance are kept. So that speaks to our tangible heritage. It's a physical building, you can actually go there and touch. On the other hand, archives refers to records of historical, legal, or cultural value which require permanent preservation. And these records can appear in various formats. For example, Ms. Edie told you of photographs. Photographs are archival records. They can also appear in the form of maps. Maps speaks to the topography of land, and you can also trace land ownership through consultation of these maps. Records can also appear in parchment, which simply means animal skin. So records where information was recorded on animal skins, especially during the medieval Europe period. After this time, records appeared in paper format. So they were mass-produced from trees. If I should digress a bit, trees contain a natural substance known as lignum, and this lignum contains an acidic substance. When paper is being produced, another substance known as alum was added. That gave texture, and these two substances combined, they were acidic, and they contributed to the degradation of the paper. Hence, paper has to be kept in suitable conditions for it to survive. Records can also appear in audiovisual format, your DVDs, and present day, they also appear electronically in the form of emails. So emails are also considered records. They can also appear in microform format in terms of microfiche and microfilm. And in the archives, we need to preserve the equipment to view these records. Your microfiche readers and your microfilm readers. Moving on. The term genealogy is an account of a person's lineage, ancestry, or their family stock. In the archives, three types of research are undertaken. You have academic, administrative, and family, or genealogical research. This is just a picture of the search room. And this is the only section where public members are allowed. Because in the archives, we have security measures in place. So you restrict your public users. These are lists of the records which facilitate family research. We have baptisms, marriages, burials, births, deaths, wills, deeds, inventories, District 8 immigrant registers, voters lists or registers of electors, plantation records, powers of attorney, and census records. These will be dealt with individually so you can understand what each contains. Seems to be very The Barbados Archives holds general parochial records, such as baptisms between the years 1637 and 1903, marriages 1643 to 1912, and burials 1643 to 1921. For records subsequent to those years given, you will need to contact the registration office. Please note that baptismal records after 1855 contain such information as the church or chapel where the event occurred. It gives the date of birth, date of baptism, child's name, parent's name, where they lived, father's occupation, and the minister who performed the ceremony. This is a record of a 1768 baptism. Please note that in the early records, all three events are combined in one book. So for instance, baptisms, marriages, and burials are placed together. And because it's an early record, the information is very skeletal, as Mrs. Edie would have explained. It's during the period of slavery, and you're getting minimal details. But as you proceed towards the late 19th century, you're given more details about baptisms. For instance, you'll be told all that I've mentioned before. And this is easy to trace your history because parents' names are given, so it's easy to find their birth, and it also gives a location, exactly where in Christchurch they would have lived. Because you usually were baptized, married, and buried at the same church. This is an example of an early marriage. Early marriages provide very skeletal details. It simply gives you the names of the two parties being married and the witnesses as well as the priest who perform the ceremony. But as we come down to later marriages, we are given much more details in terms of the names of the fathers of both parties. And this is useful for tracing the parents of these two persons, the groom as well as the bride. The ages are also given on the marriage record, so you can subtract the age from the year of the marriage, and that will give you an approximate year of the bride as well as the groom's date of birth. As shown in this picture. Burials. Burials beyond 1855 contain information such as the deceased name, the age at the time of burial, where the person lived, as well as their place of birth. So this is also a good source of tracing ancestors. Because you can also subtract the age from the year of the burial, and that will also give you an approximate year of birth. Births were recorded from the year 1890 in the island. Prior to 1890, you'll be issued a baptismal certificate. So this is an example of a birth record for the year 1933. It provides details such as the parents' names, the person who registered the child, and these are also useful sources for tracing ancestors. Deaths. Deaths were officially recorded from 1925, and the archives, the deaths provide useful information. They not only give you the age and the year at which the person died, because you can subtract the age from the year of death and gain an approximate year of that person's birth. But it also has a deeper significance. You can use a death record to trace the cause of death, to see what diseases are hereditary within your family. Usually you visit your doctor and they may inquire what diseases are prevalent, and at times you cannot answer. But when you peruse death records, you are able to answer your doctor more succinctly that X, Y, or Z is prevalent. And this is an example of a death record from 1937. Wills. A will is a person's written declaration of his or her intention as to the disposal of their property after death. So please do not hand things over verbally. It will be null and void. It must be a written declaration to be valid. We have two types of wills in the archives. Probated wills. This is the final and verified copy of a will. And wills can only be proven after the person has died. They are useful for making family connections since the names of relatives are mentioned in detail. The archives holds proof wills from 1647 to 1959. The second category of wills are foreign wills. These are written and lodged in court, but never probated. They haven't been probated. And they span the years 1820 to 1959. This is an example of a proof will in bound volume. When I say bound volume, it's collated into book form. But we do have original individual wills also. And this is an example of Sir Conrad Reed's will. And I'm not sure you could see it clearly, but okay. It mentions his ownership of a place called the Erie. The Erie is a stone's throw from here, in which the Barbados Community College stands. And he was what is Sir Conrad significant? He was the first black Chief Justice of the island of Barbados. Deeds and inventories. Another source material. These are signed and usually sealed instruments containing some type of legal transfer or contract. The Archives has deeds from 1635 to 1949. The types of deeds we have include conveyances, mortgages, releases, and deeds of gift. Because you don't always have to purchase the land. It can be passed from seed to seed. So it can pass from parent onto child as a deed of gift. Inventories. These are records which give a detailed account of the property of an individual. It can be real estate, household furniture, and it can even include slaves. And we have inventories from 1764 to 1888. This is an example of one of our deed records. But here we have a picture of the inventory of London born. This particular inventory was chosen because London born. Our records show that he was born a slave, but his father accumulated enough wealth to manumit him. Before slavery was abolished in 1834, slaves who acquired enough wealth could purchase their freedom. And London's father acquired enough wealth to purchase his freedom as well as London's siblings. And he was a wealthy black merchant in Bridgetown at that time. And he even helped organize the emigration of blacks to Liberia. He was one of the influential persons involved in that endeavor. We also have voters lists, which contain the actual names of persons who could vote. But please remember that not everyone could vote. There were certain stipulations as to who was eligible, either through property, their owning of property, or land of a certain size, or you had to be a part of the professions, lawyer, doctor. Since slaves were considered chattel, they were totally ruled out. And adult suffrage only came to us in 1951. We also have census records. And the earliest census, 1679 and 1715, but these only represent the white inhabitants. The slave registers can be obtained via the main library of the University of the West Indies, and they are in microfilm. So this is an example of a voters list between 1867 and 1881. So it gives the name of the person and why that person qualified. Either they paid taxes for a certain amount of money, they owned land and buildings, or as I said, they were in one of the established professions. Powers of this simply meant that owners of properties repatriated to Britain being our mother country, and they left their property in the hands of a specific person. So these records span 1698 to 1947. The other plantation records which can be consulted at the archives include the Bovell and Skeet, Castle Brand, Drax Hall, the Kerry newspapers, as well as Turner's Hall plantations. These not only give accounting records, but some will mention workers who actually toiled daily on these establishments, as well as wages, what the wages were like. We also have emigrants registers. Even though the Panama movement was between 1904 and 1914, we only have records from 1906 to 1912. This was pre an immigration department. Barbados only had an immigration department from 1980. So prior to that, the police station, the police was given the responsibility for immigration matters. And these provide details such as the name, the age of the immigrant, where that person lived in Barbados, parents' names, to where they were going, the immigration agent who contracted them, as well as the period of employment. So you can also subtract the person's age from the year of departure, and that can give you an approximate year of their birth for tracing ancestors. Some of the other useful sources are scrapbooks. We have Edward Stout, Eustace Shilstone, Frank Warren, Tony Van de Poel, Harold Connell, Tony Williams, and Louis Lynch. These are newspaper clippings from columnists. These were columnists, and they collated scrapbooks based on these clippings. We also have the Jill Hamilton and Joy Hunt letters, Hilda Inks notebooks, and Harold Hutchinson notebooks. These four persons were genealogists, and they deposited records from their clients in the archives for public use. And they span the 17th to the 20th century. They're alphabetically arranged by the last name, and such names as Gold, Mayo, Macpherson, Shilstone appear in these records. Some of the other useful sources are the Journal of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society, as well as the names index for that organization. We also have the Civil List. The Civil List is gives a list of names of persons who were employed in the island, and they are arranged in the Blue Books from 1833 to 1947. Between 1947 and 2007, between 1948 and 2007, they were no longer published within the Blue Books. They were published separately. We also have miscellaneous names references. These are found in the manual card catalog in the archives, and they contain things like photographs, newspaper clippings on prominent persons who were involved in trades which no longer exist, like blacksmiths, coopers. We also have the White Series, which contains genealogical notes on various families, and family histories, which were done by individuals like Martin Cox, Francis Barrow, Herbert Allen Hutchinson, and others. These persons conducted personal ancestry research, and as they published their records, they deposited a copy in the archives. But there are other sources, land tax books, which shows names of property owners, the size of the land, and the amount paid, as well as the schedules of landowners. The 1991, that was done by the British Union Oil Company. That company intended to drill for oil in the island, so they plotted where each person's land was located. So that can also be consulted at the archives. The other references, directories, handbooks, yearbooks, these contain lists of registrants in the island in terms of the professions, doctor, lawyer. So those are also useful sources for conducting family research. The St. Michael Levy books. That, we have those from 1684 to 1844. And those give an outline of persons who owned properties in Bridgetown, who paid taxes for these buildings in Bridgetown. There are also school records, which gives details of attendance registers and also daily log books for each school, and some of them are school magazines. The passport applications between the 1930s and 1940s. Some of these are accompanied by actual photographs of the applicants. And as I said previously, photographs tell their own story. The Advocate Parish Profiles and the Rocking Chair series. These are accounts of outstanding individuals who resided in our parishes. And some of them may have been sports persons, humanitarians, red.
Excuse me, Karen. We're working to a very strict time schedule here, so you have 5 minutes in which to wind up, and then we will devote the last 5 minutes to questions.
The first entry, the Victorian Emigration Society, 1890s to 1900s. That is a listing of names of poor white women who were assisted to emigrate to places like Canada, the USA, and Britain. Another source would be the National Employment Bureau records between the 1950s and 1980s. These are persons who emigrated to Canada, the US, and Britain as student nurses to work on farms, and it gives the immigrant's name, dates of birth, parents' names, previous occupations and skills, and some even give details of criminal involvement. These are the National Employment Bureau records are restricted to public access. You must first gain written permission from the National Employment Bureau to access those, because some of those persons are still alive and they contain sensitive information. Other sources, we have funeral invitation cards. So nowadays, a funeral is announced on the radio or in the newspaper, and whosoever may go. But back then, that was not the case. You had to be invited to a funeral. So we do have funeral invitation cards. We also have adoption records and divorce files. Those two are also restricted due to the fact that they contain sensitive personal information on persons who may still be alive. So you will have to go through the registration office to gain access to those. But we also, in addition to our baptisms, marriage, burials, in addition to our original sources, what we call the primary source records, we also have published genealogical sources. We have James Brando, genealogies of Barbados families. We have John Camden Houghton, our early immigrant ancestors. And the Ver Langford Oliver. These are monumental inscriptions in the churches and churchyards. Because you learn so much by going through our graveyards, by the inscriptions on the headstones. They give you the name of the person, the age they died at, and you're able to subtract that age from the year of death, and you come up with an approximate year of birth also. So please don't rule out the wealth of knowledge in the graveyards. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening.
Thank you very much, Karen. to the time and for such a comprehensive presentation. Now we'll entertain some questions now yeah, I see one gentleman ready for approximately 5 minutes or less. But ladies and gentlemen, please make your questions as brief and to the point as possible in the interest of time. And if you have specific examples, specific queries, as in previous session, please come to us afterwards. Sir, you may take it away.
Thank you very much. My name is Lloyd here, and I'm doing a lot of family research. So I thank Mr. Tate very much for the history. But I have one question at this point. I'll share some information later. But you mentioned that baptism started in 1637, or your records, baptism 1637 to 1903. I want this to be clarified, not only for me as a researcher and a social historian. I want this to be very important. If Barbados has the record history that 1627 is when Barbados was colonized, and the colonizers and the colonizers landed here together, some 10 African male with 70 or 80 English male. And the records show that there were no inhabitants on the island at the time. I think, I want some clarification for this. And 10 years after, your record starts showing baptism. Now, I'm a bit confused. If there were no inhabitants on the island and only men came here, you get what I'm saying? That would tell me that the Africans that came here left no descendants, the first 10 Africans. I just want some clarification because I'm doing some research and I'm a bit confused. So you get me, so someone can help me with that.
Mr. Larry, I think the answer to your question is quite simple. The records we are referring to that we have in the archives that begin in the 1630s are records that were kept, maintained, that were made by the colonists. Those are baptism, marriage, and burial records of the Church of England at the time. And those are the earliest official records that we have. You know, there's simply no others. Any other questions?
Well, I would like to clarify, because, you know, a lot of times we talk about these records that we have. A lot of times we talk about these records that we have, and I think we need to be clear that for Afro-Barbadians, it's not that cut and dry. So even when we talk about inscriptions on headstones and that sort of thing, right? I think I have maybe 2 ancestors that have headstones currently, 2 or 3. So for many of us Afro-Barbadians who came along in the plantocracy system, plantation system, we may not find those kinds of things. But then again, we may, right? So don't get discouraged thinking, well, you know, they talk about those other people that had money, because I have had so much success finding, you find out that your situation, like when you were growing up, that may have just been your small nucleus, but there are other parts of your family where there were resources. So tax records and land tax records and cemeteries, those are all really viable places to find history. Okay?
And let me just add, there are records of slave baptisms, marriages, and burials within the Anglican parish registers. Except, as Sandra noted earlier, you wouldn't have surnames. There were no surnames at that time. So these names, some of them were recorded in the registers.
More so after emancipation. But if you're starting with yourself and working backwards, you can figure it out. You can figure out, like, you know, my mother, my great, the records are there to help you take it backwards. Enslaved. The records are there to help you take it backwards.
Right, we have about 2 more minutes. Any more questions? Well, if there are none, and there appear to be none, we can wrap up at this stage. I just want to add, we have examples of some of those records at the back of the room. The immigration registries, which have entries for persons going to Panama as well as to a few to Brazil and so on. You can look at that and other records at the back of the room. So, just before we wrap up, and I ask our assistant, my commissioner, Canada, to do so, our senior archivist, Ms. Ingrid Kampamash, will say a few words.
Hi, good morning. Just want to inform you about a genealogy group that was formed between the Barbados Museum and Historical Society and the Archives Department has collaborated. And from March, we started a genealogy group. We were inviting persons to come and share. So we meet every 2 months at the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. You're free to join, there's no fee. So we're inviting all those locals that you can come and join us. We have almost 100 persons already, and we're looking to share resources and information and so on. So we really definitely invite you to come and join the genealogy group. Thank you. I think it's the 19th of September. It's every two months.
There are also lots of online genealogy groups that focus on Barbados family history. There's Barbados Family History on Facebook. There's Barbados Genealogy on Facebook. I have a couple of other pages that I administer. So go online and you will find lots of this activity going on.
Thank you. I think in conclusion, we could all agree that this morning's session was a very lively, informative and engaging session. For that we need to thank the members of the, for that we need to thank editors of the panel and investors. We are all now well equipped to go away and start doing a family search, and as Sandra said, we need to begin with ourselves and look backward. I think I want to definitely say that I learned a lot today. I always wondered as a child why Millie went to Brazil. That's a fact. I always wondered as a child.